Hi everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Ryan, one of the team here at Good Innovation, and I head up the work we do with charity services teams. A really warm welcome to the first of 3 webinars we're running, specifically designed for services teams to explore practical ways AI can help respond to rising demand and the changing needs of the people you're here to support. Plan for today is I'm going to kick things off by introducing the topic and the rationale behind the framework we've built for services teams, which is all about structuring how you approach AI. I'm then going to hand over to Ben, who's going to bring this to life through a project we're doing at Centrepoint. And I'm really pleased, Steve, you're here to join us as well. Steve Wilson, who is the Director of Performance and Strategy at Centrepoint, and we've been working with for a few months now, I think, to help kickstart your journey of embedding AI. Just to say, everyone, there'll be lots of time for questions at the end. So to submit a question, hopefully in the bottom right of your screen, you can see a little square made up of 9 dots. Slightly convoluted this. You have to click that square, you have to scroll down a little bit and find a button that says Q&A. And if you click that button, you could submit a question. So I'm going to be looking at those questions as we go, and there'll be a good 10 to 15 minutes at the end, hopefully, to run through those. So if you've got any questions as we go through this, please just stick them there. So back to today and why we're running these sessions. Pretty much every services team I speak to is facing the same fundamental challenge right now. How do we increase the reach and impact of our services so that we can close the gap between today's reality and the mission we exist to deliver? And AI is becoming an increasingly important part of that conversation. Not because it's a silver bullet, and today you'll hear equal amounts of excitement as well as caution from us when it comes to AI. But our work with services teams has proved that AI offers ways to help you do more of what matters. It can free up your teams from burdensome, admin-heavy, repetitive tasks that suck up time. And instead, that time could be spent where you add the most value, whether that's more headspace to think strategically, more time for creative problem solving, and of course, more time to spend with people, whether that's your colleagues and the people your services support. And look, if we're honest, as a sector, we've not always been the fastest to adopt digital change and technology. I think we're probably catching up still from digital transformation, which started probably 20 years ago. And what we believe here at Good Innovation is that starting small and building momentum is the best and the only way to do that. It doesn't always need a sweeping top-down transformation program, which is often expensive, which can be hard to implement, especially when everyone is so busy. Actually, what you need to do is take simple, practical steps that bring people with you. And that's what today is all about. But before we dive into it, I thought it might be helpful to share a few things we've learned through 2 year-long AI collaborations with lots of different charities across the sector. These are collaborations all about exploring the opportunities and the risks of AI and a sense of where the sector is at today. And largely speaking, you see a lot of the same things happening at charities. And I'm sure lots of these will sound familiar to you. Charities developing AI policies, setting up working AI groups. And some have pockets of experimentation in progress. They're testing tools and they're trying to get to grips with Copilot, generally speaking. So lots of people are doing the same things, and those things are a really good place to start. But actually, what I see is very few organizations are clear about what comes next. And a big part of the reason for that is the challenge of working out how to use AI well without losing what makes services human is a tricky one to navigate. And it's tempting to think AI adoption is mainly a technology problem. It's about tools and permissions and integrations and training to save time and money. But actually what we see is the biggest barrier to progress when it comes to AI is that it's much more of a people challenge than a technology challenge. And as you might recognize, the barriers, therefore, are usually human ones. They're things like capacity and resources. They're a major part of this. When teams are already stretched, AI can easily feel like one more thing you need to do. Digital literacy is another one. Lots of people talk about the challenges of really different levels of digital confidence and AI understanding across teams, which makes it much harder to move forward in a joined up way. And then comes a question of who owns this problem? Who owns the problem of embedding IT? And often it's seen as embedding AI. And often it's seen as an IT issue rather than a whole organization conversation. And of course, people are rightly cautious of AI and all the ethical considerations and risks that come with it. And I think that's especially true when it comes to services. The tech matters, of course, but whether it sticks depends on making it usable, safe, and normal for really busy teams. And that's why we've built this framework for services teams and charities to think about the adoption and embedding of AI. So it starts in Horizon 1 in the bottom left of this diagram that you can see there. And that first horizon that we talk about, this is the place to start doing now. And that's all about freeing up time and headspace so that you can start planning on how you might move into Horizon 2, which actually is all about embedding AI into your services. And that headspace is really important because your real challenge when you get into the Horizon 2 space is to work out where you need humans versus where AI can add value to what they do. Now, something we believe really strongly here is that AI is never going to replace humans when things like trust, lived experience, empathy are really important. And there probably isn't a place I can think where that stuff is more important than when it comes to your services. And finally, level 3 in the top right corner is something we think you need to start thinking about now. I always like to pose the question to services teams that if you wiped your service portfolio clean today and built it from the ground up, knowing what technology and AI can do, and you also considered the changing needs of the people you're here to support, you'd likely come up with a really different portfolio of services. Now, in one sense, that might feel like it's way too far out for us to worry about now, but actually I don't think it is. Take an example. If people are already going to AI to ask for advice on medical issues, for example, like what does that mean for you as a charity? If your biggest volume of traffic is information provision, if people aren't necessarily coming to your website, what does that mean? I heard about a charity recently that's developing a service which is all about guiding people on how to use AI well if you're looking for advice and information. Things like how to write the best prompts, how to question and verify what AI is telling you. That's something we think you probably should be doing right now. But actually, you only get to an idea like that by thinking a bit further into it, to the future and that Horizon 3 space. But today is all about Horizon 1 and that internal efficiencies bucket. We think it's a really sensible starting point. It allows teams to experiment, to settle into new ways of working, and to move forward thoughtfully. But the question becomes, like, how and where do you start with that? In our experience, the key is starting small. It doesn't mean small ambition. It means starting with the real work already being done today. When teams begin by identifying their actual time drains, those everyday pain points, they can uncover quick, practical opportunities where AI can help immediately. And by immediately, I mean today, tomorrow, the very next day. It sounds like it could be easy, and it is to some degree, but I think that's partly because we have a Ben and we spent a few years testing over 100 different tools and developing more than 150 use cases. So we can help charities take this learning and get started a bit faster. And as I've said, these kinds of quick wins don't always need a big program. And actually, lots of this stuff people can just get on with without even needing a formal pilot, for example. And they're all usually about making existing tasks a bit easier, a bit faster, and a bit clearer. And if you introduce this stuff well, it can help build confidence, reduce people's fear, and create momentum for what comes next. Getting that first horizon right means you'll be in a much stronger position to test bigger opportunities properly. I'll give you another example I heard about recently. This is a charity that has a peer-to-peer support service. It's a one-to-one befriending service. And what they've done is used AI to help support the matching process behind the scenes. Now, this used to be an incredibly time-consuming, very manual process that charity had to do. But now they've been able to create so many efficiencies there. The people that used to do that have time freed up to spend on much more valuable tasks, like dealing with the complex matches, for example. So once we've worked out with teams, once we worked out and identified what can help teams. And when we did this with you at Centrepoint, Steve, I think we came up with a list of like 150 use cases or so, just in a couple of weeks. Those small scale pilots give a way to experiment with new tools and ways of working without forcing change on people before they're ready. Small scale pilots allow teams to see results in context, to actually shape how that tool is being used, to build confidence through experience, and really importantly, to create proof before scaling anything up. And because teams are learning by doing in that instance, by actually living the piloting process, they learn how to run these experiments themselves. And we always say, doing it with people and not to them is really important. So what sorts of things are people piloting? Now, we've started to see really clear patterns in which pilots are landing well, and they all tend to follow really similar principles. The first one is it fixes something people already feel. The best pilots solve annoyances that already exist, repetitive admin tasks like rewriting and reformatting the same things, reading through really long documents that take ages to digest, or manual research tasks. It could be something as simple as a tool that automatically summarizes long calls or chat transcripts into case notes for staff. The time saving on something like that is visible really, really quickly. The second principle is that we need to find use cases that support people rather than threaten them. Now, this is something we feel really passionately about, and we know the sector does too. Unlike the corporate world that tend to be using AI to get rid of people and save costs, we like to think about it in the opposite way. It should be about helping the amazing people you have already free up time to do those things where they add the most value. Good pilots should feel to people like it helps me do my job better. And it shouldn't definitely feel like this is something that's happening to me. Now, Ben's going to talk a bit more about the work we did with the support workers at Centrepoint to free them up from admin and spend more time with young people. The third one is we're always looking for use cases that can scale across teams. Now, although you might pilot with one team or one person, the thing is, if you know the very same or similar solution can work for lots of other teams, it's definitely worth focusing on and prioritizing. And again, I think Ben's going to talk a bit about this one. But one example is we built a finance policy chatbot. Doesn't sound that exciting. But actually, we built it knowing that the same thing would work for any internal policy and save loads of time and lots of frustration of the finance team having to explain to 30 people every week how to claim expenses, for example. And next on the list, a good pilot needs a really specific owner or a small cohort who can give feedback. I guess the clue's in the name, really. It's a pilot, it's an experiment. And it's back to what I said earlier about being really focused on what you need to test and prove, figuring out what works and what doesn't, and then scaling it up. So these are just a few of my thoughts, having been immersed in this work for a while now. In essence, it's starting by identifying the biggest pain points you want AI to help with, introducing the very easy wins, and using that confidence and that momentum to test some bigger opportunities further down the line. And importantly, being really intentional about how the time saved is used, how you're reinvesting it where it's going to make the biggest difference to the people you're here to support. As I said, if you've got any questions on any of that, please stick them in the Q&A. We're going to come back to those at the end. But this is a really good time for me to hand over to Ben, who's our resident AI expert, and he's going to bring this to life a little bit by briefly talking about the work we've done with Steve and the team at Centrepoint, and then we'll come on to chat to Steve in a bit more detail. So Ben, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. I don't know about AI expert, AI obsessive, more likely, but we won't go into that. Cool. So my job now is to just bring to life everything Ryan just spoke about with a real life example. And thank you and shout out to Steve, who's on this call, for letting us do this. It's not every charity's kind of happy to share the kind of details of their kind of programs like this, especially when it is something so new and potentially risky like AI. So really appreciate that. And as you can see, Steve's on the call. I'll be talking to you for a little bit to give you some of the data. from the pilots, and then we'll be throwing some questions at Steve. As Ryan said, please ask any and all questions, no stupid questions here, and fire them into the chat. Ryan, do you want me to share?
Sorry, Ben, bear with me, technical issue. Keep going, and I'll get that slide back up in a second.
Okay, cool. Okay, so the project with Centrepoint, it started with a conversation we had with Steve. And our initial challenge came from their amazing kind of frontline services teams that Ryan mentioned. And this is a broad estimate, but those teams were spending about 30% of their time with service users and about 70% of their time on everything else that came with the job. So they're writing up case notes, they're doing admin, they're transcribing conversations, internal meetings, all of that other stuff we kind of have to do day to day. So our initial challenge on the project was to see if AI could help to start flip that stat the other way around. So big, interesting challenge. Since that conversation, we then broadened the project. And we broadened it beyond just frontline services. So I'll also be talking a little bit about how we work with other teams across operations. So Ryan already mentioned the chatbot we did for them, the partnerships team we worked with, the volunteering team, as well as the innovation and independent living teams. So we spread our pilots across the organization and quite far and wide. So we kind of we're running pilots in almost every pocket of Centrepoint at the same time. So our exam question expanded a little bit beyond that initial one. And the question we went into the project with was, can AI genuinely free up staff time so they can start spending more of their time doing what matters most? I think that's a really, really exciting exam question to start with. And I shall share some interesting results from that exam question. So I think the important thing that Ryan's touched on that I just really want to hammer home is that before we went anywhere near any AI tools, me, if anyone gets excited about these things, before we even mentioned any of the possible tools and solutions, we spent a good chunk of the early project just sitting down and talking to people. We had conversations with those who were actually closest to the work on the ground, and these were the same people that would be running the pilots as well. So we're running hour-long interviews with caseworkers, the volunteering team, partnerships ops, the innovation team, and the vast majority of those conversations had absolutely nothing to do with AI. And the vast majority of those conversations were more around understanding people's jobs. So where were they spending time that pulled them away from their most important work? Where were those time sucks that really kind of frustrated them on a weekly basis? What would they actually do if they had an extra 4 or 5 hours a week? And you can imagine we had some interesting answers to that question. And crucially, another part of that early conversation was around reassurance. So these pilots, as Ryan mentioned, weren't about replacing anyone, and we were really explicit about that up front. They're about freeing people up. So we'd ask questions like, where do you want to be spending more time? What's the work that you just can't get to because you're buried in admin, research, note-taking? So from those conversations, as Ryan mentioned, we had over 150 initial ideas captured, but we kind of segmented those down into 119 unique potential pilots we could have run across the organization. So you can see just from a sense of how many low-hanging fruit and opportunities there are across an organization, just from a handful of conversations. We ended up consolidating those down into about 56 that we thought were right for this type of Horizon 1 kind of pilots. And as you can imagine, there were some within that 119 that Centrepoint can just crack on and get done. They don't need a pilot. And there are some that are a bit more complex and weren't the kind of quick wins we were looking for. So there's a bit of a backlog there. We ended up prioritizing with some criteria we agreed with Steve around impact and feasibility to run, and we got down to 7 pilots that we actually ran as part of the program. And just the important thing to note there is that process started with people, not technology, and that was a critical foundation for everything that followed. So let's get into some results in a little bit. So we had our 7 use cases, and this part, before we get to the actual tools we chose and how we actually ran the use cases, is, I think, by far the most important and surprisingly difficult part of the process. And it's often where specialist support from some AI expertise is really beneficial. Because this part is once you've uncovered the problems and those time sinks within teams, it's then about translating what is a very human problem, a use case written up into a one-pager. It's essentially a challenge that a team has. It's then about matching it up to the right technology to answer that question without kind of overcomplicating it. So for Centrepoint, we thought about this in 3 ways, and it's hopefully really useful, whether you work with someone like us or whether you're doing some of this work yourself. It's a really useful framework, I think. So at Centrepoint, we agreed up front to prioritize simplicity. And what we didn't want to do is reinvent the wheel where it wasn't unnecessary or add additional costs that just weren't going to be adding value to the organization. And it's important to note here that we're also not a tech agency. So we have no need to build anything complex when simple off-the-shelf tools will do the job. And we're also entirely tech agnostic. We don't have relationships with any of the existing tools, and we're not locked into just using Microsoft or just using ChatGPT or any other tool out there. We're just looking for the best tool to get the job done. So the first bucket we looked at was just using what Centrepoint already had. This is obvious stuff, but this is where we wanted to start. Could this use case be solved by the existing technology that Centrepoint had already on their books? So like I'm sure most of you on the call, Centrepoint are a Microsoft organization, as most of the charity sector are. And probably like most of you on this call, they hadn't actually explored the power of building custom Copilot agents within their Microsoft suite. So before we recommended anything new, we explored whether their existing tech stack could actually answer those use cases we'd prioritized. This, of course, also makes IT happy, which is always a good thing if you can do that. So the second bucket was around finding some specific off-the-shelf tools. So when Microsoft tools didn't cut it, because some of these use cases were quite unique and quite nuanced, there are a range of brilliant, affordable specialist tools that solve some quite specific problems. And we've already tested and vetted over 100 of them and continue to do so. So these generally aren't expensive tools. They're just good tools, well matched to the exact use case that you have. The third one that I'll touch on very quickly was out of scope for this Horizon One project because we were looking for the low-hanging fruit and we're looking for simplicity here. And when you're looking to build a custom AI solution in the Gen AI space, I'll just issue a word of warning, and I'll be quite blunt here, because I think most use cases, building fully custom Gen AI solutions right now is just not necessary. Custom AI builds are expensive. They take many, many months. So you have to have a strong use case and some unique data to make this worthwhile. There's plenty of cases out there of charities and private sector companies spending a ton of money, a ton of time on custom AI projects. And by the time they're released, something like ChatGPT answers that use case perfectly. That's just because the technology is moving on so fast. Now, there are use cases where you will find a custom solution is the right solution, but I just hesitate and kind of urge people to kind of think before they kind of go down those routes, because those first 2 buckets, you can get some really good return on investment really quickly. So let's take a look at those use cases and the solutions we proposed for each of them. And I want to emphasize every single one of these pilots was actually fully staff-led. So we, as an organization, provided weekly support. We wrote up really comprehensive playbooks and onboarded everyone onto any of the new tools they were using. But by the end of the day, the staff ran the pilots and they owned them. And I think that's really, really important. So first up, we've been talking about frontline services. So their challenge is probably not a surprise based on what we've said so far. Their challenge was the amount of admin they had to do on a weekly basis. So for them, for caseworkers, it was transcribing casework interviews, writing up those case notes in a professional way, and then all the admin and emails and back and forth and reviews that flowed off that work. So for some caseworkers we spoke to, this was taking them up to a day of their time every single week, depending on their caseloads. So we ran a pilot with 15 caseworkers and their team leads, and we ended up recommending and using a third-party tool which was built exactly for this challenge. That tool is called Magic Notes. So it wasn't the cheapest of tools on the market, and it would be a significant investment to roll out a tool like that across 250 to 350 caseworkers across Centrepoint. So we did also investigate whether a series of Copilot agents might actually answer their challenge first, but in testing on our side, it wasn't the level of quality required for us to even recommend taking that into the pilot. So it was the tool Magic Notes that we took into that pilot. We then had 2 research-based pilots with similar challenges. So both the volunteering teams and the partnership teams were spending significant chunks of their week conducting fairly repeatable desk research. For partnerships, it was due diligence on potential new and existing partners. And for volunteering, it was more around market research. So for both of these fairly similar pilots we ran, we recommended and tested an A/B test to assess what would be the best tool for that job. So we had Copilots, which has a specialist research agent within Centrepoint's existing stack, and we gave both teams access to that and some custom prompts. And alongside that, we also tested a third-party research tool called Perplexity, which many of you may have heard of. And that was on a kind of pro paid-for account. So for both teams, we wrote custom prompts for their use cases, provided coaching on how to spot hallucinations and assess the quality of AI outputs. And after a week of both those pilots, it was clear that Perplexity was the clear winner of those two tools. It provided better quality results and much more comprehensive results as well. So we stuck with Perplexity as the tool for both of those pilots. For the innovation team, which for Centrepoint is a one-person team, their challenge was that they spent a significant portion of their budget and time with external research agencies, conducting audience research. So audience research and insights is wonderful and highly valuable. I'll stress that up front. But we spotted an opportunity to use AI tools to free up some of that budget, as well as the time, which for a one-person team is incredibly valuable. So the tool we recommended for this job is called Yasna. You probably haven't heard of this tool. I'd be surprised if you have. So it's an AI interviewer tool, and what it does is it actually runs real audience interviews with humans on your behalf. It also, at the end of all those interviews, which you control and write the interview guide for, it would do a first-pass analysis of all the results and theme that up for you. So what it does is allows a one-person team to essentially do the heavy lifting of a full research team within 48 hours. It does not replace the value of human-to-human interviews, but for a small team like that, who's spending a lot of money on third-party recruitment firms, it means you have to do less of them, and you can do higher quality human-to-human interviews. So our pilot, in this case, was working with the independent living team, and we used that tool to interview local commissioners across London. We then had two pilots where we did end up going with the existing tools internally that Centrepoint had. So a second pilot with a volunteering team who spend weeks a year interviewing service managers across the country to service volunteering needs. We built a custom co-pilot agent that could conduct that initial interview, write it up in a structured format, and pass it to the volunteering team, freeing them up to do the more difficult human work of decision-making and matching. So for the operations team, Ryan's already mentioned this, their challenge is that they were receiving about 20 to 30 emails a week from staff. And I think this is the case in almost every operations team I've spoken to, asking them simple questions that had answers within policy documents that already lived in a shared SharePoint folder. The short answer is no one wants to read through those documents right now, right? Especially when you can potentially ask an AI to do this for you. So the solution was a fairly simple custom co-pilot agent. This took about 2 hours to set up. It was trained on those documents, and it was accessible via Teams for every Centrepoint staff member when it rolls out. So that was the sixth one. And just to say, we ran a seventh one, and this one didn't work. This was a failed pilot, and you should expect this to happen when you run pilots. So this was a school's frontline services pilot, and we've put that on pause because not all schools would actually allow AI tools or transcription. So it didn't fail for a tech reason. Unsurprisingly, it failed for a kind of people and engagement reason. But that's a really useful finding, right? To find that really quickly and really cheaply. And to Ryan's earlier point, this is a very human blocker. And knowing this before investing heavily in a solution is a pretty critical thing, because that team can now have those conversations and see whether they can roll out that tool in future. Cool. So let's get back to the challenge of freeing up teams' time to do the most valuable work they did. We've got some results from a number of the pilots, and Steve's kindly let us share them with you today. So first, we're mostly services people on this call. So let's start with the frontline services pilots. So on average, we found using that tool over a number of 8 weeks, we found a weekly time saving of 5 to 6 hours per week for every person that was using that tool. The caseworkers themselves, this was often a bit higher, with some caseworkers saving a whole day per week. So essentially their entire admin was being saved using this tool. Now imagine that rolled up to 250 caseworkers if it was kind of rolled out successfully. If the 6 hours a week of time saved holds up consistently, over a year, we're talking about the equivalent of 40 full-time staff roles of time free per year due to that tool being used. So that is a huge amount of time that could be done doing other more valuable work. So that's the frontline services results. The two research pilots we ran, with volunteering and partnerships, that saved between 2 to 4 hours per week. So another huge, great result. And notable for both of these, another metric we were tracking is not just time saved, but the quality of the research. And that rose in both cases as well, with the partnerships team now having more confidence on the information they now have to make due diligence decisions. That's because the tool was doing more expansive and more in-depth research than was possible for them in a few hours per week. So finally, the audience insight work, supporting the independent living team to analyze and interview local commissioners. That saved over 6 hours of work for that research cycle, and also saved potentially thousands if that was using an external agency to recruit and do those interviews as well. So another huge win there. And just to say, these aren't marginal gains, right? You can imagine this being scaled up across the organization, and for teams that are like all of our teams, pretty stretched already, having that free time is pretty transformative on a weekly basis. But the time saved is only half the story, right? The question we always ask, and this is so important, and measure on a weekly basis during pilots, is where did that time actually go? What are people doing with that time that they have back? Now, people weren't just working less, although there's nothing wrong with that, right? I'm a proponent of a 4-day working week at some point, so we might get there. But what this meant for the frontline services teams, going back to Steve's initial challenge, is that they are actually spending more direct time with young people they were there to help. That's face-to-face time and planning activities. That's the exact work that caseworkers were most excited about doing, and less of the drudgery and admin that happen to come with the job and come with all of our jobs, right? So that's exciting. It kind of energized a lot of the team to kind of do the work that they kind of signed up to do, right? The partnerships team were able to pick up some strategy work that had been on the back burner for months because they were just too swamped and overwhelmed with work. So that's high value work, right? Strategy work. And that's human work that AI might be able to help with right now, but should never, ever be doing. That should stay with humans. And one of my favorite quotes from the whole program, a frontline caseworker said, "You simply cannot take this away from us," which I think made Steve's job a bit harder for the decision, but tells you everything about how valuable some of these tools were for people. But just quickly, what I was most excited about running these programs at Centrepoint and with other charities is seeing that aha moment for so many people taking part. It's that moment when someone who maybe comes into a program like this skeptical or fearful of AI, which is incredibly rational, or simply hasn't had the time or the space to even look into these tools, it's when they kind of see how genuinely useful these tools can be in their daily work. And that moment is infectious. It spreads. So other people see it and they want part of that too. And suddenly you've got advocates spread across the entire organization who aren't championing AI because they've been told to. They're championing it because they've actually felt the difference and seen it firsthand. And that is incredibly exciting. All right, that's the people story. Now back to some cold, hard numbers that I will leave you with. So now these ROI estimates, and these are based on time saved per person relative to the cost per person to use that tool. So the cost, as I mentioned, is generally pretty modest for the tools we're kind of recommending and using here. So talking about subscription cost per seat, ranging from about £15 per person per month to up to about £55 per month per person for the most expensive tool we're using in these pilots. So that's not an insignificant investment, right? If you scale it up, but we're not talking like huge 6-figure technology builds. It's a fairly modest kind of cost. So across the boards of the pilots that have been wrapped up, as you can see, there's some really significantly positive ROI measures there, which I think hopefully speak for themselves. But it's also worth noting that these were at fairly small scale. They were sometimes with just one person, sometimes with 3, sometimes up to a team of kind of 15 people. And we also had significant support from our side in these pilots. So there's also considerations around the ability to effectively roll out these tools alongside whether to roll them out at all, and what that might look like for an organization. So for the frontline services pilot, where significant workflow changes are actually required for that pilot to be rolled out effectively, alongside a significant investment as well, due to the number of caseworkers, we've decided that more evidence for a larger pilot might be required. But for some others, like the research pilots, where the workflow is simple, it's trainable in a couple of hours, and the cost is low, scaling those straight up across the organization for any research role is a bit of a no-brainer. So we've got some really easy decisions there. And those decisions around scaling is the next stage of our work, which is the exciting part of kind of making some of these stats kind of show out across the entire organization. But that is a story for another day that we will also be sharing. So I wanted to pull this all together before we go over to Steve and just pull some learnings which are hopefully useful for whatever stage you're at and thinking about with AI. These are hopefully things you can kind of take away and use in your kind of day-to-day work. So the first one, you would expect this from a strategy and innovation consultancy, but it is start with the real actual problems, not with the technology. It's not the question of what can AI do, it's where are people actually stuck? And that discovery process is the foundation for everything that follows. Second up, quick wins, build momentum. I think Ryan made the point really clearly that when people start seeing results quickly, and we're talking with these pilots a matter of weeks, or sometimes a matter of days when people start seeing results, we're not talking about months here. It builds belief across the organization, and other teams start asking, can we do that too? And then finally, it's about starting really small and kind of scaling what works. So you don't actually need a big AI strategy and everything perfectly signed off to get going with some of these pilots. I've seen charities that are spending like almost 3 years now writing an AI policy. Like that's important. That is important work, but it's not the only work you need to be doing. You can also run a good few pilots, gather some real evidence, which might actually inform your policy going forwards, and then build out a practical roadmap of what to scale with some actual real results you can take to the board here as well. And that's exciting. And ultimately, this is all about using AI to free people up, but they have to experience that benefit themselves. You can't just tell people AI will help and force them. They need to feel it. And that's, I think, the most exciting part of piloting and why it works. It lowers the risk and gives you the most upside as well. So that's exactly what Centrepoint did. And you've heard from me, you've heard from Ryan, but now's a chance to kind of hear from Steve in his own words, how he kind of felt the project went, and hopefully he can share some additional kind of lessons that he kind of took out of it from his side as well. So welcome, Steve. First question for you, I'm going to get straight into it. Let's go right back to the start if we can. So I mentioned when we first had this conversation, you already had a big change program and transformation program kind of underway, and you felt that AI was a little bit conspicuous in its absence within that change program. And I'm sure there's many on this call that probably feel quite similar about their transformation and change programs right now. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, Steve, kind of why you felt it was so important to consider AI within that and the kind of decisions you kind of made off the back of that.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thanks, Ben and Ryan, for inviting me. Hello, everyone. You just reminded me, actually, one of the first conversations we had was we came to you to talk about, could you help us develop an AI strategy? So I'm glad we didn't on reflection, but yeah. So yeah, we are partway through a business transformation program called Big Change Program at Centrepoint, which is around improving our ways of working, processes, our systems. We have gone through the discovery and design phases. We've got to a solution which we're about to start implementing. My concern was, I think, originally that although AI would play a part in that, had to play a part in that business transformation program, just by the nature of it, it wasn't explicit in its remit. And I wanted something that was explicitly looking at AI in particular. The business transformation program is by the nature of it, a multi-year program. And I think we had to approach AI in a different way. We needed to tackle it with more pace for a whole variety of reasons. So I didn't want to kind of work on the timeline of a potential large-scale transformation program. So we formed one of those AI working groups that you've mentioned, but essentially the work of that working group is meant to be entirely complementary to the business transformation program. The discovery and design phases were really useful, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, that we had lots of workshops around the whole organization to understand how we currently work and how we'd like to work in the future. But then we combined that with our initial work together with you, and that led to that long list of potential use cases that you've already referred to. And I think right from the outset, you referred to them as problems to solve, and I think that's stuck with us. That's how we've looked at this the whole way through. What problems have we got to solve as an organization, which will help us make steps towards achieving our mission ultimately. So yeah, that's how we've looked at it, and that's our initial thinking at the outset.
Cool, thanks, Steve. And that really resonates because I guess we work with quite a few across the charity sector, and we're often working on, I guess, what would fall in the bucket of transformation projects as well. And the AI conversations and the transformation conversations we just have so much overlap. They're often one and the same conversation. So it was really exciting, I think, to kind of have our AI conversation as part of that wider kind of change program, because AI is a transformation as well. So switching up a little bit. So I think we talked a lot about the need to kind of save people time, and especially kind of the frontline services workers, the kind of caseworkers we talked about. I guess we've showed some of the data on how the pilots have gone, but I'd just love to hear in your own words, like what could this mean in practice for those teams, and what kind of impact could it have, you know, if some of those numbers stood up to the test of kind of rolling it out across the organization?
Yeah, I think when we first spoke, it was, you know, if we didn't do anything else, we had to do something that would solve problems for those frontline teams, those support workers, at Centrepoint known as support and progression officers. So to enable them to spend more time with the young people they support. There's many other use cases, we've over 100 that we've identified, but ultimately, you know, that's central to our mission, and 2/3 of our colleagues work in services, work in frontline teams, either directly with young people or indirectly. And so, yeah, it had to be the priority of whatever work we did together. I think for me as well, because I'm responsible for data analytics as well at Centrepoint, that we've got evidence from that team, data analytics team now, about which factors, both on arrival into our services and during young person's time in service, that have the most impact on successful outcomes for those young people. And so finding additional time for colleagues to do more of those things, which we know we've got evidence they work, rather than lower level admin. And quite frankly, you know, we recruit many of those colleagues because they're great at working with young people, not because they're great at doing admin, or they're digitally savvy, or those things. That's the priority, is that how effective they are in that key part of their role. So yeah, it had to be the most important thing for us to try and achieve.
I love that, and awesome to hear about those impact stats you have. So you've got some clarity with that freed up time, like where to actually point that time. I love that. So AI projects, you know, there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of positivity and negativity and all sorts. If you happen to hop on LinkedIn or the internet or see any news about this, it can be a project which, you know, at leadership level and all the way through an organization, can make people feel quite nervous, right? And there's a lot of the kind of unexpected uncertainty in a project like this, so it kind of feel a bit like a leap into the unknown. I'm just keen to hear, like, if you had any kind of concerns kind of going into this project, or anything of that note, just to kind of share with people.
Yeah, loads probably, to be honest. I think, and I'd encourage everyone to think about this, is we de-risked a lot of those concerns by working with yourselves, quite frankly, because we hadn't done this before, and you had some experience that we could benefit from and learn from. So yeah, that immediately made it rather easier to think about those, you know, or to deal with those concerns, and have an approach that would consider those concerns as well. I think, you know, if you work in the charity sector, cost, budget, it's a difficult environment out there. We've just demonstrated the return on investment. You've got to secure that investment in the first place, and there's so many competing, you know, priorities for that investment. So that is definitely a concern. My peers in senior executive team have been broadly supportive though, so that's been helpful, as is the chief executive. So we know we need to do something in this area. So we have to try and make space for it, I think, however difficult that might be, to get to that return on investment. Big thing for me, big concern was lack of knowledge and skills at all levels. So if we don't have the knowledge in the organization, that's regardless of whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about AI, we can't make decisions about how we use it and how we invest in it. So to understand both benefits and risks, especially at senior level, I think is important. And Ryan, you came into the session with our senior executive teams, that was helpful. One really important thing, and I didn't do this at the very outset, but partway through, was to understand the thoughts of young people that we support. We've got a lived experience advisory board, so a group of current and former young people. And so I was interested in their views on a range of things. So AI in general, but how it could benefit young people and deliver our strategy, but probably some specific things as well. So obviously we did Magic Notes, so I wanted their views directly on taking case notes, action plans, risk assessments, that impacts them directly. I was interested in whether those young people would consider using AI assistant to seek advice rather than more traditional forms of advice. Like our teams, for example, because anecdotally, you hear that's happening. You'd expect it to be happening. I guess really importantly, how we maintain, authentic young people's voices. We've got a world with obviously increasing AI presence. Young people like the rest of us are using AI to augment what they do and assist them in what they do. I think something on my mind as well was around digital exclusion. What could Centrepoint do to help that? We know that's a problem factor. I actually wanted to get their ideas. They had innovative ideas, so as I expected, so that was great as well, which from a different angle than my colleagues. But most important, and this kind of supported my thinking of potential problems or concerns. What they were most interested in, most concerned about was bias, transparency, fairness, privacy, accountability, all of those things, ethics. Somebody earlier today in a meeting this morning mentioned environmental impact to me, which we have thought about, but not enough, not kind of avoided thinking about that, I think. So, sorry, that's a big lift, but with quite a lot of concerns that run in mind, I suppose.
Thanks, Steve. I think it's a really good move. And making the most of your advisory board, that's absolutely brilliant. And I'm sure many people on this call have similar kind of boards within their charities, and it's a really good engagement. I think you got a lot out of that, right? I will not touch on all the kind of ethics and environmental concerns right now. I think we might do a session at some point on some of that, because we've got a lot of work with multiple charities around that. So I'd be happy to share more about that. But I'd love to hear, Steve, if you just had kind of one learning that you came out the other side of this project with, that you'd kind of take away and it's kind of left you with, what would that be?
I don't know if I have one learning. Sorry, I might miss the brief here, but a couple of quick ones. But I just keep it simple. Like the best use cases are really very simple, even kind of dull and boring. So I think, explore that area first. That there's probably some really straightforward things that you could start with. I think you've already mentioned that. I think all of the pilots have been effective to various extents, apart from the one in schools, which you touched upon. I think if you step back and think how long some of these things take and how much of your time they take, note taking, research, due diligence, answering queries, the things that we've mentioned. How AI can be applied to remove, ease that low-level admin really, really quickly, really easily. And then I guess I was surprised about and concerned about before about certainly the pilot in services was quality. And we saw improvements in quality, which was fantastic. Improvements in compliance, which is fantastic, removing human error, ensuring completeness of case notes that may not have been consistent before. So that was brilliant. You know, the enthusiasm of those involved in the pilots, which you've touched upon. We've had colleagues experiencing slight withdrawal symptoms of missing their AI tool, which has been interesting. I think as well, you know, I said about keeping it simple. I do read lots of your LinkedIn posts, both of you, but the stuff around only 6 ways of using AI, I think, you know, sticking to those things and keeping it quite simple, I think you'll get some quite quick benefit.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for reading my LinkedIn. At least one person does, which makes me happy. That's brought me joy. Amazing. I've got plenty more questions for you, Steve, but I'm conscious there's plenty of questions from the audience. I want to leave 10 minutes so we can kind of get through as many of those as we can. So Ryan, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, we'll do our very best, team, to get through as many of these, as Ben says, as we can. And if we don't get to all of them, we can always come back and answer them. So we've had some really good ones here. I'm going to start with this one from Eleanor. Thanks, Eleanor. It seems like the biggest challenge in this process, Ben, sorry, I think this is a question for you, but Steve, feel free to chip in as well. Seems like the biggest challenge in this process is the translation piece between that user research, identifying all those problems and creating use cases and moving from there to the pilot. It feels like it could be a sort of solutions architect type role. Like, do you think charities can build that internal capability, or do they just need to rely on external experts? What do you reckon, Ben?
That's such a great question. Thank you, Eleanor. Which is the classic thing to say to a question. I generally mean that though. So I think that's like a new and emerging role, and I've seen it named like a few different things, like AI operator, AI leads, and there are some people within organizations already that have that kind of skill set, but it's quite a merging and a mashing of various skill sets, often a kind of innovation skills, that kind of design thinking skills for the kind of discovery piece, plus some like tech savviness and ability to kind of like dig in and build some of these tools and solutions. So some people will naturally, over the past 3 years, have worked on those skills. So I think we've seen a couple of charities start to hire for roles that can take up some of those things. So NDCS have just hired for an AI lead that has a lot of these skills. I know Breast Cancer Now has done something similar as well. So I expect to see this is a role that will be hired for. And you may find someone, if you're lucky, within your charity that has that kind of mashing of skills. But currently, that's a role that externals like us are often playing. I think because we're in the early stages, right? I don't think people know exactly what that role is. But we've certainly seen in the private sector, the AI operator term has been used quite a lot, and there's quite a few roles popping up that I would hope that kind of translates to the charity sector as well. So yes, Ellen, I think it's a role. You're absolutely right, but not too many charities are hiring for it just yet, but we're starting to see it come through.
Awesome, thanks, Ben. I've got now a question from Zoe, which I think will resonate with lots of people who we've all tried using ChatGPT and other tools like that give us some fairly creative answers to things, shall we say, like hallucinations all the time. So I guess maybe this is specifically for the research ones, Ben, that we ran. How much checking do we need to do for accuracy? Like, lots of people have experienced hallucinations with even summary transcripts, for example. Like, how big a task was that in the pilots we were running?
Yes, another interesting one. So hallucinations, they are still a problem with AI. They've dropped significantly, about 20% over the past few months for the leading models, but they are still a problem. And for something like due diligence, which was one of the use cases, a massive problem, right? If you're getting that wrong and you're kind of passing on that information and making decisions about a partner that's just not correct. So part of this is using the right tool for the right job, as we kind of talked about. So ChatGPT, absolutely not the right solution for due diligence research. Do not use it for that. You can maybe do some quick research and triple check it. But a tool like Perplexity, with some good custom prompts and choosing the right model and some training through a bit of good prompt and right tool. So Perplexity was instructed in the prompts to come up with verifiable facts and kind of links to every single data point within the output. it made it easier for the humans in the partnerships team in that side to go through and validate. And the first 3 weeks of that pilot, we were getting them to spend an hour or two every week just checking the outputs. And we did some training around how to spot hallucination, how to spot bias. And essentially, the human is accountable for that stuff, right? I don't think it's an excuse or should be an excuse anytime for passing on an AI kind of output and saying, oh, the AI got that wrong. It's kind of human accountability. But we found that more trust was built as that prompt was refined and the tool improved for the use case. It got a lot better and the quality rose. Steve, don't know where to come in on that one. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Apologies, inevitable. Yeah, just following from your point, really, certainly our frontline teams absolutely need to be checking through those case notes before dropping them in the CRM. So we've got two quality checks, really. We've got the human, but also the AI tool, I suppose. So yeah, really important you go back and check and edit.
Thanks both. This, again, I think is a question that will resonate with lots of people, even if actually you're not necessarily in a small charity. We've had a question like, how might a small charity, let's say less than 25 people, with little to no budget, realize the productivity benefits of AI when you've got less opportunity to scale, you've got lots of one-person roles? I'll have a go at this one, Ben, but sort of chip in. I think as you mentioned, and Ben, tell me exactly what the figures were, but there are some of these tools that we were using with different teams, like the research ones, for example, where the paid for subscriptions were around £200 a year. Is that right, Ben? Have I got that roughly correct?
Yes. Yeah.
That's good. So there definitely are some tools that with little budget, shall we say, can be really usable. I don't necessarily have a really good answer to that scale question, though, to be honest. If you've got a limited number of people, the economies of scale is harder to realize there. But Ben, I don't know if you've got anything else, any other sort of suggestions on how a small charity might approach this?
Yeah, I guess one tip to keep your cost down is choose a tool that could do many things. And there's some fabulous tools out there. I would, if possible, this doesn't always land well, but I'm always blunt about this. Don't use Copilot if you've got another choice right now, just because it's a little further behind other tools. You can do a lot more and get a lot more done with a small charity if you use something like Claude, Gemini, or even ChatGPT still. Getting people really good, a 15-person team, really good at using that one tool. It's fairly low cost across those 15 people. And if you get them building, custom agents and custom GPTs, it's quite an easy no-code skill, even though it sounds wildly complicated, it's not. To answer their own use cases, you then have 15 people answering their own problems, using the tool to its maximum capacity. So that'll be my one tip. Just keep it simple, get really good at one tool. Don't worry about all the other expensive tools you could possibly use for the moment. That's the kind of low budget, high impact approach I think about.
I think we were talking about this the other day, Ben. One other advantage you might have is you probably don't have 48 different people that need to give you permission to use it, like some of the charities that we work with. So you might be able to adopt some of them a little bit quicker. Right, got a question from Stephen here. Apologies if you missed this. I don't think you did, Stephen. How were hours saved figures calculated, Ben? Were they self-reported by staff, like measured against a baseline, or captured through workflow analytics, for example? Like, what lightweight ways of validating time saved could you recommend?
Yeah, so it was a very manual and human process. So what we did is every single Friday, we sat down and had a call with each of the pilot leads that were running, and we gave them a spreadsheet right at the start of the pilot that tracked all the key metrics. Some of those were properly quant metrics that we were tracking, but the time saved, that was kind of self-reported. We weren't actually tracking those people and what they were doing with their time day to day. That was a self-reported metric, but we made sure people were honest, and we also talked about, had a conversation around that metric. So we're tracking it on a weekly basis across each of the pilots and made sure it was tracked every single Friday. So people weren't kind of looking back a few weeks and kind of making things up or misremembering. It was kind of as accurate as it could be for a self-reported statistic.
Awesome, thank you, Ben. I think we're almost running out of time, team, but Erica, I thank you for this question because it kind of sets up my closing piece. So as first, you just say apologies if I haven't got around to your question. but we will come back to you on some of those. We can see them all here. Erica asked us a question. It'd be great to get some more practical examples of how AI has been used in services. And that is exactly what the very next webinar is going to be all about, Erica. So lots more to come on that. But if you want to find out more in the meantime, please just let us know. Just leaves me to say a massive thank you to Steve for coming along today and giving us your time. I'm super grateful for that, Steve. And thanks to everyone for attending. I hope you found it useful. We'll be sending out a little feedback form after today. We'd be very grateful if you could fill that in. It's a very short one, I promise. We want to try and make these sessions as useful as possible for everyone. As I say, the next webinar in the series is coming up soon. It's on the 5th of March, and it's going to be about that question, Erica, you posed to us, which is about the role of AI within services, that Horizon 2 section of the framework that we built. So if any of you want to talk more about some of the stuff we've gone through today, please just reach out to Ben and myself. We'll send you a follow-up email probably tomorrow about it. Or if you want to talk a bit more about how you might run a sort of project we did with Steve at Centrepoint, obviously we'd be very happy to talk to you about that as well. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your day. And thanks again, Steve, for your time.